Hello, I'm Rachel McAlpine, I'm 85, and today I'm learning how to be old from Tracy Farr, who's just had published a fabulous new novel called Wonderland. It's a great read, but it's not that book, it's diaries and journals that we're going to talk about, especially when you're older, either looking back at your old diaries or starting up a new one. Old diaries, new diaries, either way, it's a powerful thing, as you'll find out. Now, Tracy hosts an event called Bad Diaries Salons. Tracy, thank you very much for coming along and doing this with me.
Oh, thank you for inviting me on. It's lovely to join your podcast.
Anyway, Tracy, how old are you?
I am 63.
Nice number. It's got those two round digits in it.
It does, and it's divisible by 3.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
What else? You're a scientist. Keep going.
No, that's all I've got for you, really.
Okay, it's not a science podcast. This is about learning how to be old, and you've been learning all your life. I know that because you've written 2 novels, your earlier novels. One included a 100-year-old person,
Yes.
and the other one, The Life and Loves of Lena Gaunt, has an octogenarian like me.
Yes, yes. Well, she's just turning 80 in that book.
Yeah,
yes.
just about there.
Yeah. I have been learning to be old all my life. I've learnt from the best, I have to tell you, Rachel. So I had two very strong role models, both of my grandmothers, who, of course, when I first met them, weren't old. They were my maternal grandmother was only 43 when I was born. I was the first child of the first child, so I was number 1 grandchild, and my other grandmother was in her 50s when I was born. So, and in fact, my maternal grandmother only died 3 years ago. So she lived to 104.
104 is pretty old.
Yeah, she had one of her other sisters made it to 102, and their dad made it to 96. So there are, it's in the genes.
You've got the genes.
I sort of imagine that a life lived long is quite normal, and then I reflect on how lucky I have been to have had my grandmothers in my life for so long. I was 60 when my grandmother died. There aren't many 60-year-olds that still have a grandmother.
No.
And I knew my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother, and so I've been very lucky. I've had some amazing older role models, particularly women, and both of my grandmothers were amazing. I don't like to use the word, but it seems the right word. Feisty women. But peculiar in their own ways, very different from each other.
Which one are you more like? Which one do you want to be like?
I want to have elements of both of them.
All right.
Yeah.
Pick a mix.
Yeah. My maternal grandmother, I think it would be, I don't think anyone would argue with me, was more universally loved than my paternal grandmother, who was a difficult woman.
Yeah.
But my paternal grandmother was an artist and was trying to be a writer. She had some poems published late in life. She went back to study late in life. She did an art degree in her 60s.
So learning. So writing.
Yes.
And universally loved.
Yeah.
Well,
pick and mix. Yeah.
Cool. So not long ago, I went to my very first Bad Diaries evening.
Yes.
And you are Bad Diaries, so to speak. It was a phenomenal, lovely, glorious, peculiar evening.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you made it along, and it was a good one. But there are always good ones. Yeah. So, Bad Diaries Salons started in 2017. And it was a writer friend of mine. She's a Melbourne-based writer, Jenny Ackland, and she is a great diary keeper. So she's kept diaries since her teen years. There were a lot of writers on Twitter back in the day, and she said to Twitter, were there any writers out there who still had their old teenage diaries, especially their bad kind of cringe teenage diaries, and if they did, would they be prepared to read from them in front of an audience. Put the word out.
What an ask.
I know. And so every response from, ranging from me saying, I burned all my diaries when I was 26, to people who said, yes, count me in. And so winter 2017, the first Bad Diaries Salon kind of test run. It was in a wine bar in Melbourne. Jen hosted it, and she invited along 5 writers, and they all brought their diaries. It was a smallish audience, probably a dozen or 20 people. I don't know, I wasn't there. But it worked, and there was enthusiasm. So we ended up running 4 salons in 2017. 3 of them were in Melbourne, and 1 of them was in Perth. So the Bad Diaries Salon that you came to in November in Wellington at Meow for Verb Festival was our 26th salon. So we've held 26 salons, about half and half in Australia and Aotearoa. Nearly 90 writers have read at those salons.
So it's a bit of a phenomenon been bubbling away in 2 countries.
So the basic formula is the invitation goes, we invite writers who have diaries of some sort, diaries, journals, notebooks, unpublished, to read from those unpublished writings in front of an audience.
At the event, I was very struck with the fact that you said, what happens at Bad Diaries stays at Bad Diaries.
Yes.
And I have followed that
Thank you.
the letter, because they're very likely to read something that now they look at and they think, how could I be so naff? Oh, that silly little girl. Have you ever heard such rubbish? Yeah. And so that's sort of a counter, but a very affectionate way at the same time. We understood what it's like to be 14 and have your boyfriend turn you down, or whatever. We know what that's like, and we know, our thoughts are smaller, but they're very heartfelt. And we were all laughing at the funny things that people wrote when they were 14 or 21, and the depth of the passion. But it doesn't rule out actually caring for those lovely people.
Exactly. Looking with affection and warmth, and embracing and hugging that little person. So we do ask them not to edit, other than, changing names or leaving out names or skipping.
Yeah.
But we're writers, we can't help it. We put together a reading. That's what we do. And so we do sometimes have writers who will put together a reading that might start when they're 7 years old. It might go to when they're 14. It might skip to when they're 21. It might then skip to when they're 43.
Yeah, you get a 6 or just change.
You might get reflection. You might get contrast. You might get resonances. You might get all of the above. So the last time I read at a Bad Diaries Salon rather than hosted, was 2023, and I was 61.
Oh, but you're chickens, yes.
I know. But most of us
it's old enough to have had a huge number of experiences and gone through great change.
Yeah.
I mean, just being midlife is a huge change. Being an adolescent is a huge change.
Yeah.
Too. But so is getting really old. So that's very interesting, because this is about learning how to be old. Well, I was thinking that the very word diary and the concept diary has changed hugely. Like, of course, I've got an appointments diary when I've got down Tracy for podcast outlined in purple. Anything that's a thing, like an appointment, now needs a purple frame. Otherwise, I'll miss it. So when I was a kid, a diary did mean something. You wrote your personal thoughts and ideas, and no one was ever to read it. If they did, it was not only a sin, but it was extremely painful for good reasons, as Bad Diaries show. But the whole purpose was to express yourself. Or perhaps you were practicing writing, but not with the idea that anyone would ever read it. And now we have journals, which seem to be kind of the same thing almost.
More
More formalised and more. You have classes in journaling, whereas I wouldn't even imagine having a class in writing a diary. Get out of my face! Let me do this. Shut away in my bedroom with the door shut.
I acknowledge the distinction that you're making, but I think for me, they're the same thing, or they can be the same thing, or they're many things. So I think the concept of journaling as being perhaps a little bit more of an American concept, or that the idea that you must use the word journal as being something a bit more
a bit posher,
a bit more thoughts gone into it, or it's a bit more for posterity rather than a diary is just is a little bit trivial or something. And yet we have a rich history of going back to Pepys diaries. So I don't distinguish. I think they come from similar roots. So diary from daily and journal, something daily. So I think they come from that same root. I'm also going to lump in notebooks as well.
I've got them everywhere. But they are just thoughts. What do you think that means? It had a meaning at the time. What is that, a saucepan, or is it
It's wormish.
Yes, sometimes that's a sort of diary.
Yes. Rachel's holding a spiral-bound notebook with unruled blank pages, and there are drawings in black ink, and they're all very different.
And they're all scribbly. So there's kind of worky things in there.
Yeah.
You've got to say these are not good drawings but I do share them. I don't care that they're not good.
One of the show and tells that I brought is from a writer and comics maker called Linda Barry, who will tell you that there's no such thing as a not good drawing and that everyone can draw.
I suppose I definitely had diaries when I was a kid, but I'm somebody who burns things. Literally, I don't want my love letters, thank you very much, going into the Turnbull Library, as was threatened on one occasion.
Right.
So I got them back eventually and had a wonderful bonfire. So I don't like keeping things very much, and I'm no use to the archivists, really.
Well, that's a really interesting thing to think about. So for people who have already kept a diary at different times in their life, or for people who are thinking about starting to keep a diary, is to think about what happens to the diary when you're not there to have control over it. And so there might be that impulse to contain, to archive, to retain, to curate that material, and to retain as much as possible. And then there might be the impulse, or the very strong impulse from the person, the subject, the writer, to say, not on your Nelly, no way, no, these are not going nowhere. And it can have an impact on what you do commit to your diary, can't it?
It can totally, if it's in your mind, it totally would influence it.
Yeah.
I've got a friend who's going to be my literary executor.
Oh.
And he won't have very much to do. So I'd better make sure I don't have any incriminating documents anyway. Luckily, I've had a couple of hard drive crashes in my life when everything pretty much vanishes. Not everything. Didn't really matter in the end. See, not to me, it might to someone else. Yeah. If you're old or getting old, or think you might be old one day, and you think you'd like to start a diary, just totally don't hold back because you think you're not a writer. That is so not true. The diary anybody can do. And the diaries that these wonderful writers read from, they're not written wonderfully. No. Some of them are. They're blurting.
Yeah.
That's good. We've got to blurt. It's good for us.
Exactly. I think that's one of the best things about a diary is its ability to contain a blurt, or to absorb a blurt, to be the vehicle for a blurt. And in fact, I caught up with a friend just this week, and they were asking me about Bad Diaries Salons, and she said, I've just started writing a diary again. I haven't done it since I was a child. And this person isn't a writer, quote unquote, a writer. And has just gotten so into it. Yeah.
It's much more likely that somebody with that impulse might start writing on social media or blogging.
Yes.
And that's so different.
Yes.
It's very, very interesting. Do it myself, done it myself. Yep. But the diary is personal and private.
Yeah. And I think that you're talking about audience.
Yeah.
Who's it
Anybody
written to?
can see it.
When I'm writing in my diary, I'm writing to myself. I might have an eye on somebody else reading it or not reading it, you know. I might think, so-and-so must never read this, or so-and-so. I hope one day my child will read, you know. So you might have an eye on an audience that's not you. But in essence, you're writing to yourself. You're writing to yourself or to no one, or to your diary as almost as an object or an individual or an entity.
Oh, dear diary.
Dear diary. You, yeah, exactly. It's a friend, a very close friend that's sort of inside you somewhere. And then sort of the next kind of level of publicity, if you like, is the letter, you know. Yeah. So a letter written from one person to one person. True. Dear Rachel, I might say. And I'm addressing it to you, and I'm saying you, and my intention is that you will read it. Yep. But I'm also, in sending it to you, I am making it yours. And then social media. I mean, I absolutely agree with you. A lot of people will use blogs or Substacks or social media or Facebook or, you know, all of these things as a kind of a diary, as a place to blurt. So instead of blurting to the diary, they'll blurt on social media. That can have its own ramifications and terrible kind of outcomes. Oh la la. But it's different. It's public. It's a performance. Yeah, it's a performance.
That's true.
And that's a very, 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 very different thing.
And in fact, that's almost the extreme. At that point, anyone in the whole world can read this. And what's more, it's there forever usually, unless you energetically try to change it. It was too late because someone's forwarded it to somebody
or screenshot it. And not only is it out there in public, but it's also there for response as well. Yeah. So you get the responses. I think a lot of people who might otherwise have been scribbling away in a diary write on social media or write on Substacks or blogs and feel that it kind of occupies the same niche, but I don't think it does. No. I don't think it does. If it's public, it doesn't occupy the same niche.
So let's talk about diaries and what they do for you. I'm certainly thinking about older people and think that older people can look back on their diaries and realise that their life has a shape.
Yes.
It can remind you of things that happened. If you're reading your own diaries, it can bring back old feelings.
Good and bad.
It can make you realise that you've got new insights now. And so that's a very beautiful thing for an older person to have a diary. And an older person can start a diary at any point. Today, people could start writing a diary. The other thing I wanted to raise with you, have you read about expressive writing?
Only recently, when you pointed it out to me. Yes, it was really interesting in terms of diary writing.
I should describe the things that are relevant to diaries and to older people, in fact. So James Pennebaker, James Pennebaker. It's a wonderful name, but it's hard to say in a hurry. He was interested in the connection between health, sickness, and writing. So he had various experiments which have been developed and replicated, and versions of them, at least 2,000 studies in all sorts of fields, and used in conjunction with therapy. But it's something anybody can do at any time. He got people to write, students at first, to write without any sort of censorship and without anyone ever reading it for 15 or 20 minutes in the class about their worst traumatic experience, or even a very bad experience. And their writings were destroyed. Then they had to do it again and again, same thing. But some conclusions he talked about was that the actual process of writing can change something in your brain. Not for everybody and not sort of life-changing necessarily, but consistently effective in improving things with a great number of people. And it was that when you're thinking, you often just go round and round and round. You think the same thoughts. They just go on and on and on, and it just makes things worse, not better. But if you write them down, you're forcing yourself to kind of organize your thoughts, at least into words and sentences. You have to slow down because you can think faster than you can write, most people. And that you kind of land up writing a story, because we all make up stories about what's happened to us. But then you're doing it 3 times or 4 times, say, and if you're writing the same story over and over again, that is not helpful. That's like ruminating on paper. But if you allow your mind to do its thing and think, this is boring, I'm going to do it a different way, and you end up getting a different perspective, perhaps reframing it, just a little jolt into analytical thinking as opposed to blurting. And that in itself is the process of writing that is powerful and different from talking or thinking. What do you reckon?
Oh, it makes complete and utter sense to me. It was interesting to read it put into words what I would have intuited.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful to see the research backing that up.
Actually, I interviewed my big sister, Jill. She had just written a little memoir of her working life, A Joyful Working Life. And she said it was only in the writing of that she made sense of her working life. She had thought of it as a patchwork, first this job, then that job, then that job. They're all different, going from demonstrating custard to working out policy and working with communities to set their health service goals, etc. And that it made it seem like a coherent sequence. And it was the writing, a bit like the expressive writing experience demonstrated. So writing a diary, if you're old, starting one now, if you just started it and included writing about some stuff about your earlier life, perhaps, who knows, you'll be surprised at what develops, what new ideas you get. I mean, a lot of my writing is just to find out what I think, but it does a lot more than that. Oh, I didn't know I thought that. Oh, no, and here's a new thought. I'm sure I never thought that before until I started writing. So it doesn't matter how terrible your writing is, because nobody's going to ever look at it. It's still doing that thing inside your brain, which is, I think, would be very satisfying if you're looking back on your life, as sometimes we do at this age.
Penny Baker's work seemed to also show that there were health benefits, like, fewer visits to the doctor, but just general health benefits. But I think it can be valuable if you're looking back on a long life lived, but it can also be just staying in tune with what's happening now. It can be, it's like, I can't think of anything to write. Look out the window or just look around the room and just write about the weather. And once you start, I reckon, once I start, if my mind is blank and I just start to write the weather, and then some other thought will come, or
that's a great tip. That's a great tip. And it is very grounding, isn't it, to just do that? It's a kind of mindfulness exercise, actually, to write about what's right under your nose or out the window, and know that it doesn't matter where you start. The act of writing can just it'd be very soothing in itself, and also quite very exciting. And of course, in a diary, they can very much be thoughts about what's coming, the good things that are in your week, and what you're going to do with the rest of your life.
I think scribbling down their thoughts might be a less intimidating way to think about it.
Scribbling down your thoughts. Let's enshrine that. Or hunting out those old diaries and just reading them with that compassion and amusement and, I don't know, parental care, I suppose, for your earlier self.
Looking back with warmth and care.
Okay. Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks, Rachel.
So if you've got a diary or a journal going, that's a very special thing. It can be so many things. It's obviously a creative outlet, but it can also be an imaginary friend, a listener. It can be a health worker, a brain trainer, and a record, and a way to make sense of your life. Terrific. So that's all for now. Thanks for listening or watching. And if you know somebody who might benefit from this or like this episode, please tell them about it, because I don't think they're going to find it all by themselves. Bye for now. See you later.